Hi, welcome to the History Talks. I'm your host Will, and this is Sebastian. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution. So Sebastian, can you tell us about the events that led up to the Industrial Revolution?
Yes. So the Industrial Revolution, what you have to understand first are the Age of Exploration and the Second Agricultural Revolution. So during the Age of Exploration, Europe imports all this technology and starts innovating on it. You get from bombards to field cannons and stuff like that, which ends up going into the 17th century. So then that goes into the 18th century. You have major wars like the 7 Years' War and stuff like that. So you have all these European countries that are competing with each other, so that kind of starts to build a competitive spirit. And this culminates when the Second Agricultural Revolution happens. Because during the late 1600s, most of the 1700s, basically England and the Netherlands spent their time, finally for once being predominant instead of, Spain or any of the other powers. So in England and the Netherlands, you have this development of the Second Agricultural Revolution where you get inventions like the seed drill and a bunch of other stuff that just make it really efficient to grow crops. Like, you can grow tons of them. It also makes it especially efficient if you have a large farm with a single farmer rather than that same piece of land being owned by a bunch of different farmers, because you can just have these massive fields of single crop farms and seasonal farms and whatnot, because you can just produce so much food now.
Okay, let me stop you there. So you're saying the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution were actually technology improvements that allowed farming to be more efficient. So, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to get there, when we're saying these improvements, these technological improvements happened in England and the Netherlands, why do you think they happened in England and the Netherlands and not in, for example, why not in China? Why not in Germany? Why not in America?
Well, to start, England and the Netherlands were major powers on the world stage. The Netherlands, they had just stolen the spice trade, as some people call it, because they had, taken over, monopolized the spice trade. Britain, they had all these colonies. They had just won the 7 Years' War, and the 7 Years' War was England and Prussia defeating half of Europe.
Okay, so they were powerful this time. When you say power, does that mean they have wealth to be able to invest in technological advancements? Is that what they were doing? Were they specifically putting their money into advancing the technology because they had acquired all this wealth and power?
Well, partially wealth, also interconnectivity. They can draw resources from anywhere in the globe, especially England. England had special access to, things like iron and coal, and that's going to be important later. And both England and Netherlands, like you were saying, they had all this wealth, so, they can make some investments in themselves,
Right.
And sometimes this results in things like the South Sea bubble, but other times it results in, at first, stuff like the seed drill, and then...
Yeah, but the seed drill was created in Northwest Europe, in either the Netherlands or England.
Yeah.
It wasn't created, even though England had access to all these foreign ports and supplies and everything, it wasn't created in the South Seas. It wasn't created in, Africa. It wasn't created in Asia. It was created there. Why? What do you think is the reason that this particular place, out of the entire world, it was this particular place, this small section of Northwest Europe, is where it was created?
Well, that's a very complicated question to answer. For one thing, I feel like there was definitely a very competitive spirit that had been developed. From the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. England had, or not just England, but Europe as a whole. The burgher class was more, or not the burgher class, that didn't exist for a while, but the merchant class was more important to Europe for a very long time than it was to most other countries. Maybe it was kind of important in some countries like Mali, but for most of European history, especially post Roman Empire, the merchant class is really important, and I feel like this just is kind of a sign that there's just this like culture of competition, and then this culminates with the rise of England and the Netherlands because you've had technology is on course. By 1500 Europe had caught up to the rest of the world technologically. It was no longer a backwater, and China was no longer the number one in technology.
Okay, so I follow what you're saying. That hypothesis makes sense to me. Essentially, you're saying that you believe the reason that these technological advancements occurred in this one particular region is because the people who lived there, they had a very competitive spirit that drove them to do this, and that is what resulted in the technology advancing there rather than in other places. Is that correct?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that.
Okay. So it's created there. So we have improvements in agriculture. And around what year is this happening?
So the first improvements in agriculture were, we're talking 1760s.
Okay, 1760s. And then, so what happened from there? There must have been some kind of explosion that came because
there was a great population boom.
Right, I can imagine if all of a sudden you're able to produce a lot more food with the same amount of physical labor, same amount of manual labor can produce a lot more food, and you have a population that's driven, that's competitive, then I imagine all sorts of things are going to occur as a result of that. Is that what happened?
Yes. Well, also, not only that, but also the Enclosure Acts. So, England's Parliament realizes, hey, we can make a lot more food and a lot more profit if we consolidate the farms, let larger farms take over smaller farms, take the commons, and so you get these big farms, you get farmers being pushed off their lands, because we're consolidating the farms. That's the Enclosure Acts, and people are producing a lot more kids, including these people. So you just have this boost in unemployed population. So where do they go? The cities. So cities like Newcastle and London.
Okay, well, why were they going to the cities? What was there for them in the cities?
Jobs. Cities have long been, the place of crafts, and now during this time, they were developing what's called cottage industry by modern historians.
Okay, and this is still the 1760s, or
yeah?
Okay, so 1760s. So we have this abundance of labor, right? We have this technology that's been invented that it allows farmers to produce a lot more food, per laborer.
Yeah.
So you have all this extra labor. So the labor is going to the city to work in cottage industries. And what are cottage industries exactly?
You can think of them as kind of like not assembly lines proper, because those aren't invented yet, but they're kind of like like basically workshops inside of cottages that produce whatever, usually textiles. And they kind of have like a similar manner to an assembly line in the sense that people produce goods, they work together, they make a finished product onto the next finished product.
Okay, so you might have, for example, a cottage. An example maybe you might have a team of laborers who work producing shoes, and they go and they essentially mass produce shoes. They just produce shoe after shoe after shoe. Is that correct? And
I mean, mass production is a bit of an inaccurate term, because until some developments are going to result from this, mass production doesn't exist until the inventions like the water frame. So there's this guy named Richard Arkwright. Him and his partner, whose name has been lost to history, or not lost to history, but is not taught that often. These two, they make an invention called the water frame.
And what year is this?
So the water frame was invented, I want to say 1770 something.
Oh, okay, so this is the time between when the agricultural portion of the Industrial Revolution started and when we get to the water wheel is not that far. It might only be 15 years or so.
Yeah,
Okay.
Because I mean, like, the water frame directly results from this cottage industry, because people, they want to streamline this.
And what does the water frame do? Produces power?
It's a water powered loom. Like it can produce textiles really really fast.
Okay, I see.
So you get what is seen as like a proto factory being built along like rivers, like especially the River Toms, other rivers. There's a lot of navigable rivers in England. That's one of the things that contributed to this working in the first place.
Okay.
You see these like proto factories that just use the water frame, to produce lots of textiles for profit.
Okay.
And this is where you transition from, maybe traditional burghers to entrepreneurs and bourgeois.
Okay.
Because now people are going from, oh, I'm a craftsman, I'm going to just, maybe not be part of a guild because this is England, but, make my own thing.
Okay.
But now you get people who own factories and hire workers to work in their water frame factories.
Okay, so we're starting. So in the late 1700s, we have a group of people who have this competitive spirit. They also have acquired some wealth and power, and they put some of those resources they put into advancing their technology. They advance their technology in the area of agriculture. That frees up labor, which then moves into the city, which is then producing more products, right?
Yeah.
So these products, then we have a further technological advance there, where we have what you were calling proto factories, and we're getting into maybe the 1770s or 1780s there, and we have these proto factories coming around where they're starting to produce more and more and doing it more efficiently, and the technological advances are coming along with it too. Okay, so then what happens there? What happens next?
So I don't recall if it's 1775 or 1785, but there's this guy named James Watt. He invents the steam engine.
Okay.
Technically, there were like steam engines before that, and even all the way back to the Roman Empire. There's this Greek guy who apparently made a blueprint for what could function as a steam engine. But James Watt invents the proper steam engine.
He invents one that can actually be used.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm assuming that's significant because now you're no longer tied to having a water wheel next to a river. You could be. Yeah. You don't have to be next to a river. You could be anywhere you want.
And not only is it not dependent on the river, it's much faster than the water frame.
Okay.
So people can. So if you imagine you're like a traditional burgher who has a bit of money on their hands, you're going to look at this, say, hey, this is getting kind of profitable. So you're going to look at some town, you're going to invest in, buying some steam engines so you can make a factory. You're in like one of these cities or one of these towns. You have like a large supply of labor because, all these unemployed people. So you're going to hire some of them, as cheap as you physically can. And you're going to set them to working on, usually it was textiles. Textiles was the dominant industry of the time, but, whatever your factory produces. And that's going to be very profitable because now with the steam engine, you can actually have mass production.
Okay.
You can mass.
So when people talk about mass production, is that the official turning point where mass production is invented? Is it comes along with the steam engine? James Watt's steam engine. And where was James Watt? Was he English?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we actually have mass production. We have a true industrial revolution. So what happens there? Does it start to expand to other countries, or do England and the Netherlands just keep their hands on it and keep it as a secret, and they say, oh, we don't want other places to have our technology?
England tries its best to keep it just in England, The Netherlands, they try to develop some, they get some stuff, but they have to also deal with flooding. America somehow manages to get its hands on that, even after the revolution, just because...
Do you think that's because Americans were... many Americans at this time, even after the revolution, or during the revolution, right, were, they had spent the first part of their life as British citizens, right, and then they rebelled, so they still had ties to Britain. Maybe they had connections there. Do you think that had something to do with how it would spread to America next?
Yeah, most likely.
There's a common culture, there's a shared language. a shared history.
Hmm. Yeah. So it spreads to America. It spread to Europe is interrupted by Napoleonic Wars because how are you going to trade during a war, especially when your country is doing everything it can to make sure its enemy does not get its hands on this technology.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So yeah. So you're saying England or Britain? I guess are they referring to as the British Empire at this time? So Britain does not want France to get it because they don't want it falling into Napoleon's hands. But what about did Napoleon? Did he ever take territory in the Netherlands? I know he had a difficult time getting to England because of the English Navy in the Channel, but
he did annex the Netherlands and set up some weird government in there.
Oh, so I wonder if he was able to acquire the technology when he did that.
He would have, but
to the ground.
He would have, but the Netherlands, they were mostly focused on making polders and whatnot. They're making reclaiming land, making those windmills.
Okay. They're focused on the fact that their agriculture is based around these very lowland geographical features. Okay, so maybe their technology was really only specific to their particular
at the beginning
their
anyway.
particular geographic situation. Okay, so this was kept from Napoleon because. As we talked about in a previous episode, England had the English Channel. They had a very strong navy. They were able to repel Napoleon because of that. They knew that if their technology got into Napoleon's hands, he would probably use it. Probably. I wouldn't say probably. He would definitely use it to his advantage and to their disadvantage. So they wanted to keep this as part of the competitive spirit you talked about. They wanted to keep this so they would have it in their advantage. But it did come over to America. So what happened next?
So after the Napoleonic Wars, then it's much harder to keep it a secret because everyone's like, yay, we can trade now. There's no more war going on. So it spreads to Germany. It spreads to France. It spreads to Russia. Though France and Russia are at first kind of weird about it because they're absolute monarchies, and if you notice what's happening in England is that the middle class becomes really, really powerful thanks to the Industrial Revolution. A lot more powerful than the aristocracy because it's these entrepreneurs who have all the wealth, and therefore they have the power. So they're going to demand voting rights or whatnot or whatever.
Okay.
So France, they're not an absolute monarchy. After when the Congress of Vienna happened, they tried to set up a monarchy in France that would stop another revolution. Russia is an absolute monarchy, so they'll use some industrialization. Like they made some factories in St. Petersburg and some railways that connect to Moscow, but they're going to try to Russia tries to keep it so that it's tightly under the monarch's control because if look at what's happening in England, we gotta control this if we're going to manage to both get the advantage from industrialization and not get overthrown. And this does slow down industrialization a lot in Russia, but by the time of the Soviet Union, Russia is still an agricultural economy.
Okay, so what about the spread to the New World? What's going on in America at this time?
So industrialization is flourishing in the northern United States.
Okay.
Southern.
What year are we talking about now?
So we're talking from 1770s, all the way up until 1800s.
Okay.
Yeah, for prior to 1860, the South found it very profitable to use cotton. The North just found it extremely profitable to keep going with factories and industrialization. Canada was industrializing because they were British Dominion, so industrialization there.
Okay.
Industrialization has a harder time getting to Mexico, though by the mid-19th century it would eventually reach, Mexico and South America.
Okay, so it's growing. So it starts in the late 1700s. It's growing throughout the early 1800s. How long does the Industrial Revolution last, and what would you consider to be the end point for it, and when we would go into another era, or would you even say we're still in some form of some some advanced form of the Industrial Revolution right now.
Yeah, because a lot of historians say, at least in broad terms, information age and all these other ages are still part of the Industrial Revolution because we're still seeing this trend of massive population growth and massive technological advancement. People actually expecting that in the future technology will get better instead of medieval era where they expected things would just stay the same. I personally would posit, the end of the proper industrial age at like 1914.
Okay, so the time of World War One.
Yeah.
Okay, and why do you think why would you say that the Industrial Revolution, or are we just calling this the Industrial Era?
I'd say the Industrial Era.
Okay, so
both
the
first
Industrial
wave
Era.
and
So
second
I guess
wave.
the question is, the Industrial Era. Why would you say that it ended with the First World War?
So by this point, all the countries that want to industrialize, most of them have industrialized. Russia is still a little behind, as well as a bunch of other areas, but for the most part, most of the countries, they've industrialized. We get some really new technologies that just go beyond the previous scope, like planes that last longer than 5 seconds or however long the first plane flight lasted. You get the tank. All these developments happen during or after World War One.
Okay.
Prior to World War One, you get some more, I'd say some developments that are more, I'd say, closely linked to steam engines and coal. If you're talking first wave, we're talking like the steam engine itself and factories, and if we're talking second wave, we're talking oil and gas lamps, automobiles, assembly lines.
Okay, so the distinction you're making is that the difference is that in the age which you are calling the Industrial Era, the inventions had to do with improvements in, for example, food production, transportation, consumer goods, whereas in beginning with World War One, the advancements or the technological advancements we're talking about, the airplanes, tanks, things that are related to military campaigns.
I wouldn't say that's exactly the
Okay, so
split. I'd say the split has some more to do with the proper industrial era was heavily tied to coal.
Okay.
And and the tank that runs on oil. Planes run on oil.
Okay, so that's the distinction you make, is the fuel source.
Yeah.
So around the time of World War One is when we go from coal, which coal is powering steam. Right?
Yeah.
So we go from coal to gasoline, and that's powering combustion.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay, so that sounds like a good distinction. You're really switching because, before that, your fuel source is before steam. What is your primary fuel source? We talked about maybe you might have a water wheel, but your primary fuel source is going to be somebody, a person pushing a cart, or a horse pulling a cart, for example. You actually have a living being pushing or pulling something. Then we go to the first layer of machines is the steam engine, the first significant, and then we go to combustion engines. Okay, so we still have. So would you say? So what era would you call that began in World War One then?
It's hard to pin down. I would say this is the era of people you have the
Called the modern era.
yes,
Okay.
that's the term I was looking for.
All right, there we go.
That's
We'll call it the modern era. Would you say that we are still in that era? If I want to go up to a store right now, I get in a car which is powered by a combustion engine, and I drive up there.
That could be said. However, the focus in technological development reflects what I would call the information era. Because nowadays, if you are going into technology, maybe you're going into like the traditional sciences of studying biology, but generally you're talking about either studying medicine or slightly more likely studying new technologies.
Okay, you're saying most technologists, the intelligent, motivated people who go into technology now. There's some very smart people who are working on engines, for example. But a lot of that, and there are electric engines, for example. But yeah, a lot of the technological advances are simply refining the combustion engine, um, making it utilize oil more efficiently, or extracting oil more efficiently. We have all kinds of ways that we could get oil now that we couldn't, that were just completely impractical a couple of decades ago, and now can be done. But so we've had the same sort of fuel source there,
Yeah.
the same sort of engine types. They just keep becoming more and more refined. But you're saying a lot of the actual breakthroughs in technology are in completely different areas.
Yeah. Most notably in information, you get stuff like the iPhone is one of the bigger breakthroughs, but also
Right. That essentially have everybody, people all over the world carrying a handheld computer with them at all
Yeah.
times, which is what a smartphone or a mobile phone is.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay. Okay. And then I think that's pretty good. Did you have any more words you wanted to say about the Industrial Revolution or any of the events surrounding it?
I just wanted to. There was this one quote from Adam Smith. Adam Smith basically wrote the book on capitalism. He said that if you have someone focused on a great many things, like back in the medieval era where people would make their own dresses and farm their own food, then they're not very efficient at all. But if they focus on one thing, focus on being a factory worker, focus on being a cook, whatever, then they become very efficient, and they will make new ways to be more efficient, which I feel like is just part of what makes there be so many innovations, steam engine or whatever, that occur during this.
Okay, so you think specialization essentially you think has a lot to do with it, rather than people being a jack of all trades. And
Yeah.
I can see some validity to that. All right, well, thank you, and very nicely done, and we hope to see you all again in our next episode.